Good morning, everyone who's already joined. I'm going to do a little check-in question like normal, just to kind of get us used to using the chat. So today's question is, what is your favorite Halloween movie? And Gabby, just let me know if you can hear me okay. Nicole, Hocus Pocus is also my favorite Halloween movie. I think I've watched it every year since I was like 6. I also like Practical Magic, but I don't know if I think that's considered a Halloween movie or just a fall movie in general. Welcome to everyone who's just popping in. We'll go ahead and get started right at 10 a.m. Pacific time. If you're just joining, we want you guys to use the chat today. So the first question's unrelated to agreements, but what is your favorite Halloween movie? Because we have Halloween coming up. I haven't actually watched any of the ones on, what's that network? It used to be ABC Family. And they play Halloween movies like all day long for all of October. Freeform, I think it is. Nice. Shannon likes Hocus Pocus as well. I feel like that's the winner. Okay. Well, we will go ahead and get started today. We have lots of content to get through, and this is a brand new module. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Starting with some introductions. So I may have tricked you guys. Sukhdeep was going to lead this session, but I'm going to be leading it today. So if you haven't had the chance to meet me, my name is Courtney Fearing. I'm the Client Success Director here at NextGen. And then I do have Gabby Cuevas on, our Client Education Specialist. So she will be manning the chat and the questions while I'm going through, because oftentimes I'm focused on the content. I don't always see what you're typing as we're moving through. So speaking of the chat and questions, we want you guys to participate as much as possible. You are muted by default, which sometimes makes it sound like I'm talking to myself for an hour. So the more you guys can interact, the better for us. We will have some polls to launch today. And then additionally, we have the chat, which is kind of just a running list of things, either comments, questions. What we really like to see with the chat is things where comments where you guys can help each other out if you have ideas for something or if you have a question for the crowd. Because part of these webinars is not just us presenting the content, but you guys kind of sharing best practices with each other. Additionally, there's the questions tool. So you can also feel free to type questions in there and we can push the answers out to either you or the entire group. So if at any point you have questions, definitely feel free to type them in. You don't have to wait for me, or obviously if there's any sort of technical difficulties or you can't hear me, you can type in there as well. So for today's agenda, this is a brand new module, the agreement module. So we're going to spend some time just talking about what is an agreement, defining agreements as it relates to NextGen, talking about how to set up the module, how to create agreements, and then we're going to dive into how to actually use agreements on work orders, which will look really similar to the workflows that we've gone through with the non-stock and stock items if you were able to join us for our previous 2 webinars. Then we'll have a question and answer, and then a closing. So starting out with just what is an agreement. So we're defining an agreement as a signed deal between 2 parties. And the 2 parties in this case would be you, so the organization that's using NextGen, and a vendor or contractor. And this agreement is stipulating an exchange of services or items for money. So in NextGen, there's 2 types of agreements that we're going to be looking at today, and we will cover these in depth. But we do have contract agreements, meaning you're just going to have a lump sum of money that you have to spend with a particular vendor in a particular time frame. Or you can set up blanket agreements that are going to have specific line items, meaning that there's specific items or services that there's an agreed upon price that you're going to pay per line item. So those are the 2 different types, and I think it'll make more sense after we see that in the software. But before we get started, I'm going to launch a poll, and I want to hear if you guys already have agreements. I'm assuming that you came today because you have some interest in agreements. And so I want to hear if you do have agreements, are they for preventive maintenance? Are they for corrective maintenance? Both? Or maybe you just were curious about what agreements were, so you don't have any, but you came today. And then kind of building off this poll, if you guys wouldn't mind, for those of you that do have agreements, if you could type them into the chat, like what are the types of work or the vendors that you have agreements with, so people can get a better idea of what these are. So I'll give people some time to fill out the poll. And I see some of us putting both and preventive maintenance. So if you could add on to your answer in the chat, that would be great.
Courtney, I just wanted to make sure that this is recording since I can't see on my end.
Yes, it is. It is recording. Thank you for checking. And that's a good time to remind you guys, this session's recorded. We have been setting up, Gabby's been setting up nice little knowledge base articles with all of the slide deck where you can access that, the information, and a link to the recording. So you'll both receive the recording in an email, and also you can view it at any time on the knowledge base. Okay, so I'm gonna
And then
close out
just in
this-
case
oh, go
anybody,
ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to update everyone. So just in case you all missed the stock warehouse workflow webinar, that was re-recorded. So that is also on the knowledge base.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to close this out and show the results. So it looks like almost half of the people who voted do have agreements for both corrective and preventive maintenance. So I just want to open up the chat to see. So we have agreements for lawn care, snow removal, HVAC, underground storage tank, fuel stations. Okay, great. Thank you for those of you that are putting those examples in. It's helpful for me too, so then I can create realistic scenarios for you. But okay. All right, so keeping it moving, let's talk about how you would first time set this up. So the nice thing is the agreements module, there is a slight setup. The module isn't just sitting there. If you've been looking through on the left side, you won't see it by default, but it is a very easy setup. You don't really need our help unless, we'll get to the last bullet point here, where if you need us to import some agreements, then you might need our help. But to start using it, you could turn it on today. And the way that you do that, I'll show you this in the software, but to turn the module on, the agreements module is one of our additional modules that's sitting in the additional modules section of the company options. So if you're familiar with backflow or flushing, same area to turn the agreements module on. The second thing we're going to talk about is this access list. This is an optional feature to turn on when using agreements. So really briefly, just to explain what this locks down who can actually use agreements and add them to work orders. So if only certain people should be able to use agreements, you can create a list and a specific list of employees that are able to add this to work orders. And a really important piece to point out here is that even system administrators do need to be added to that access list. So I wanted to clarify that because a lot of times in our software, system admin they're special. They can do anything even without having the user permission or without being assigned to something. They can access and see all records. But even this one, if you are not on the access list, you will not be able to add the agreement to a work order. So I'll definitely show you guys how you can turn that on and set that up. And then if you've been in our previous two webinars, we've talked about these two company options in depth. The same two company options, the controlled inventory and approval by hierarchy, exist for agreements as well. So agreements, it might be a little confusing at first, but the workflows themselves follow exactly the same structure as the non-stock and stock item workflows in terms of going through a requisition and purchase orders, even for agreements for services. So we'll see that a little bit later today. And then the last piece of setting up the agreements, if you're going to start using agreements in NextGen, you obviously need to have some agreements set up. So 3 options to do that. Like anything else, when you're first time getting records in, whether it's assets or, vendors, we can do a mass import for you. So if you have your agreement information in a template, our data migration team can bring those in for you one time. Or you can add them manually, which is what I'll be showing you today. And then the last option would be if your agreements actually are stored in another software or you need them to interact with another software, we can write an integration. But obviously, as a caveat for that last option, those of you that do have existing integrations with us, that that's not that's going to be an additional fee. So I just want to make sure that's clear. That's not something that you can just request. It would need to be discussed and the project laid out, and our tech team would need to get with your tech team and set up all the details of integration. Today, I'm just going to be focusing on how to add them manually because that's what you guys would have the ability to do on your end. And so with that, I put this slide in here because I know that it's been popular to get the deck after the presentation. So I did put all of the basic steps for how to add an agreement. But at this point, I'm going to close out of the presentation and go into NextGen. But I will also pause to see if any questions have come up so far based on that information. I'm not seeing. I think we're good to go. Okay, so once you turn the agreements module on, it does sit under the warehouse main module down here. But the first thing you would have to do is turn it on. So go to settings. And then you're going to go to company options. I've left this overnight, so I might have to log out and log back in. Okay, Gabby, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you dropped off a bit.
I did. I had to switch Wi-Fi, so it defaulted me to the other one. Okay, glad I'm back. Okay, so to turn on the agreements module, I'm going to click Settings, and then
Oh, I don't know if you're sharing your screen.
oh, I haven't been sharing. Oh, did it cut off when it dropped me? I got you. Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so third time's a charm. To turn on the agreements, you're going to go to Settings, and then you're going to go to Setup, and then Company Options. So again, for those of you that do have multiple domains, make sure that you're clicked into the correct domain to turn this on for. Or if you need to turn it on for all of them, you can do that too. And then everything's going to be under, well, the first one we need to actually just turn the module on is under additional modules. So it's kind of nice. These used to be just under the general section, but now we actually have a section dedicated to these modules that you can turn on and off. So you would come over here, you would just make sure that this agreement flag is checked. And the nice thing is there's no specific ID that needs to be set up. It's just a check on and a check off to be able to see that module. So once that's on, you'll see the module sitting under the warehouse tab. The other settings that we're going to talk about today are under inventory, just like the previous webinars that we've talked about. We have our agreement approval by hierarchy and agreement controlled inventory, and then the use agreement access list. So for now, while we're building the agreements, I'm going to turn the access list on. I'm actually going to turn it off when I go through the workflows, but just to show you what that setup looks like, I'm going to leave it on for now. And we will come back to this screen because I'm going to be toggling controlled inventory on for one of the workflows. So we coming back and forth. So once you've turned the module on and the access list on, if you are choosing to use the access list, then you would just need to add your agreements. So again, under warehouse and then the agreements tab, similar to our other modules, you're just going to click the new button in the upper left-hand corner. And again, this is assuming that you are going to bring in agreements manually and not from a data dump. This is the steps that you would follow. Okay, so I saw some people using this for snowplow, so I'll kind of steal that example for this first one. You can, just like any other module, you can leave the auto numbering on, or it can be turned off, or you can override the auto numbering and put in a custom number. That's up to you. I'm happy to go into those details if people want to see more about that, but that's not necessarily specific to today's content. So I'll see if there's any questions, but you can put a prefix in just like any other numbering in our system. This part's really important and will change the layout of the agreement record. So like I said in the introduction, you're either going to have a blanket or contract agreement, depending on what you're setting up. And then the statuses, again, similar to other modules, our statuses are configurable in lookup. So if you had the need to have additional statuses, you can easily add those. For now, we do just have open, close, and expired. Pretty self-explanatory. Expired, you would come here and make agreement expired if it's past its expiration date, or if you're no longer using an agreement, you can change it to close. But more than likely, when you're setting this up, you're going to have an open status, or have it in open status rather. Requested by is going to default to your name because you're the person creating it, but you could change this if you wanted it to reflect someone else's name. And then you're going to put in your start and end date. So maybe you have an agreement for 1 year, 6 months, 2 years. And if you guys don't already know this handy little trick, if I wanted to make this for a year, you have 2 options. One, you can just pick any date and then edit the year, which is probably the easiest. The other thing you can do is you can click the calendar at the top and it will keep zooming out. So if you wanted to go to like another year, you then click into those days. So either way, probably editing it is just the easiest for this type of thing. Okay, and then you can leave this if the agreement is for a specific department and division, you can leave that assigned, or you can clear it out. So if it's autofilling from your employee record to clear that out, you just click the blank bar at the top. And then you do have to have a vendor. That's why this is marked with a red asterisk, because the whole idea of an agreement is that it's with a vendor. So you'll need to assign which vendor this agreement is with. And then down here, we are leaving a place for an initiated by. Some of you may have the need to track two people um, that are related to this agreement. So you can choose to use this field for whomever like works for your organization. One way we know people are using it is if you have a specific buyer in your organization that's negotiating the details between the agreements, you can put their name here. It's just going to be a list of employees in the system. So if you wanted to, if you're not seeing someone in this drop down, just you need to go add them as an employee first. And then here is where you're going to put the description, which for contract, as a reminder, contract is the one where I'm just going to have a lump sum of money. So I'm not necessarily putting specific line items for goods and services. So the description would be really important for this. Okay. You can attach an account number if you like, just like many other records across our system. And then the agreement amount is going to be the total amount that you can spend with this vendor for this agreement. Once you fill in the agreement amount, the agreement balance will autofill. And we can see how that is useful later on because I have some agreements that I've already been using. But basically, as you attach these agreements to work orders and spend money, it will count down from this balance. So it's a running balance that's going to show you how much money you have left to spend. So that's a really cool feature because you can always come here and get an accurate picture of like how much money you have left on each agreement. And then similar to other modules, you can choose to configure user-defined fields to show up on the agreement record if there's other information you want to track that we don't have a field for up here. And then you're just going to click Save. And once you do, you see the record starts to populate with our familiar, zones. We've got standard attachments and comments. We have the history panels. So what these will show is once you start using this agreement on a work order, inventory requisition, purchase order, etc., those work orders will be visible here. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for anything you need to see related to this agreement. The access list, just want to point this out. Again, you're only going to see this if you have the company option use access list on. And if you do have that on, then you have to add people here. Otherwise, no one will be able to see this agreement when they're adding it to work orders. So if you want to set up your access list, the way that you do it is you come to each agreement, you click manage, and then you select the employees that should be able to use this agreement. And just to draw your attention, you can always use this funnel icon anytime you see this as a search. So you don't have to scroll endlessly. Pick one that doesn't exist, but you get the idea there. Okay, and so then you would select them and add the list and click save. I'm not going to add those right now. I'm actually going to go turn that company option off just so that I don't have that restriction on during today's demo. Okay, so that would be a contract agreement. Very simple record, just has these basic details at the top and the balance. So if there's any questions on that, feel free to send them into the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving through and show how to create a blanket agreement. Okay. And as you can see, I've put in some test ones here, so you can see that my list is building, and you can see what the agreements are labeled with, whether they're blanket, contract, quick descriptions, the status of them, all of those basic details. So if you want to add a blanket agreement, same steps, click the add new. Blanket's actually selected by default. And I'm going to leave some of these fields blank just to kind of go through a little quicker. I will assign a vendor. Um, and then the other piece that you're going to see with a blanket agreement record is this agreement detail zone. And that's because, like we talked about, blanket agreements have specific line items for the money. It's telling you how you can spend the money, basically. So you'd still fill in an agreement amount. Most likely, you'd still put in an end date. But then you're going to come down here and actually add specific agreements, specific details. So to do that, you click the add button, and then the two types of details that you can add are going to be either items or services. So an example of a service, my agreement example here was going to be like related to trees, tree removal, planting trees, etc. So my service might be tree removal, haul off, and disposal. You can actually choose to set individual statuses and expiration dates for each line item, or you can leave that blank and rely on the overall agreement expiration date and end date, but you have the ability to do that here if you want. Um, and then you're going to set a price for how much that item or service should cost. And you do have to assign a unit of measure. So for those of you that missed our first webinar where we talked about the item record, this UOM unit of measure field, if you want to add to that dropdown, you can do so in lookups. So basically what I'm saying here is like each time this service is performed, it's going to cost $2,000. And so you can also add items as well. Just to point out, these items are not coming from your stock items. These are separate items that relate to this agreement. And that's what that would look like. So you can obviously put as many line items here as needed, but that's the difference between your blanket and contract agreements. And just while we're here, I can show you some examples that I had done. So if you look at an existing agreement record, this gives you a better idea of what this would look like, where you start to build out work orders. Using this agreement, it gives you the total of the work orders. If you've had inventory requisitions or purchase orders associated with this agreement, they will be tracked here on this record. And your balance is going to continue subtracting as the agreement money is used. So I've used $2,000, so I have $23,000 left. So this is an example of what it would look like once you've actually been using the agreement in the system. So I do want to stop there. One, to see if there's any questions, and then two, to kind of just see, based on what we've covered so far, what types of agreements do we think you guys will be using? So I'm going to launch our second poll here. So based on what I showed, do you think you guys are going to be using contract agreements, blanket agreements, both, or you're still deciding? And if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in while we're waiting for people to fill out the poll. And then again, while we're waiting, I just want to also point out, as we are about to dive into the workflows, we are presenting one way to use agreements, one way to set them up, but obviously you guys always find creative ways to use things. And like, for instance, one conversation I've had recently with a client is we intended for agreements to be financial agreements. But I did talk to someone who wanted to use the agreements as a place to just store um, like agreed upon work that would be done by a contractor, but not necessarily use it for the financial purposes. So with everything that I'm showing you the functionality, but obviously you guys will find creative ways to how you want to use things and what workflow you want to use within the system capabilities, of course. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and publish the results. So it looks like we are almost split between using both or still deciding. I'm guessing some of you that are still deciding, this is maybe your first time hearing about agreements, so your brain's probably spinning with how can you make use of this, but you might not necessarily know right off the bat. Um, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. But before I do, I haven't missed any questions, Gabby, or anything to point out before we go into the workflows.
No, we're good on questions right now.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to dive back into the settings because I am going to turn the access list off. So just a reminder of how to get to there. That's under settings and setup and company options. And then under inventory. So once I turn this access list off, that zone is going to disappear off of the agreement record. So if you're going to set up your agreements and you're not seeing that access list, probably you just need to come turn this on. I'm going to turn it off so that I don't have to worry about that restriction. And for the first workflow, I am going to leave controlled inventory off. So similar to what we did with non-stock and stock, this is going to be, anyone has access to add agreements to the work orders. There doesn't need to be any interaction with the warehouse team. It's just kind of like an open system for anyone to pull from. So I'm going to start with a work order. And I'm just going to simply fill out some of these details. And I'm going to do this for fallen tree cleanup and removal. So I'm not going to worry too much about filling out all of the work order details since that's not necessarily the purpose of today's webinar. But obviously, we do always recommend filling out as many details as possible and attaching assets. What you're going to see if the agreement module is turned on is on every work order record, there's now an agreement zone. So the first step, if you wanted to associate an agreement with a work order, is to come to that agreement zone and click add. Now, when you have controlled inventory turned off, it's a very simple add and select the agreement. So this pop-up window is letting me select the agreement that I want to associate with this work order. You have two options in terms of finding the agreement that you want to use. You can either search by vendor or by the agreement. So if you are searching by agreement, you're just going to see a list of all your agreement numbers, whether they're contract or blanket, and which vendor they are with. If you use the vendor dropdown, then what you can do is you can select the vendor, and then you're going to see the agreements that were created with that vendor. And then you can click from this left side panel, and then it shows you a preview of the details from that agreement record. So it's kind of nice. You can see all of these details. I know a lot of times when we're adding things to work orders, it's like, oh, but I want to be able to see this aspect of the agreement. And that's nice. In this pop-up window, you can do exactly that. Then you're going to select, in this case, I'm using a blanket agreement. So I'll remember to go through and do a contract one next. But I am using a blanket agreement, which means that I actually need to select the line item or items that are going to be used for this work order. So you can select more than one or one, whatever is relevant, but you do have to select a line item, unlike a contract agreement. So I'm going to select the service of the tree haul off and removal. And then you have this screen, which is very similar to when you're adding items as well, where you're going to state the quantity that you need. And it shows you the unit of measure here and the date and the basic details. And then you would click attach. So I want to explain what this pop-up means here. After I clicked attach, it gave me a pop-up that says, do you want to attach this selected agreement vendor as a contractor resource in the work order? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about vendors and contractors and how it relates to this process. So we added the agreement to the work order. You can see that down here. And that agreement is with a vendor. We set that up when we set up the agreement. Now, some of you will also have vendors and they're performing work. So you want to be able to assign work to them using the contractor portal, or you want to be able to pull reports where that contractor was listed as a resource. So what this pop-up is asking is, hey, do you want to take that vendor and also add them as a resource on the work order? So if you say yes here, what you're going to see is in the resource zone, it's going to add that contractor under that. Just like for those of you that already assign contractors work in NextGen, same zone that you would do that. You will see that it's yellow, and that's because this is specifically set up so that it's not double counting for job costing purposes. So we want to show that this vendor, Environmental Tree Services, was added as a contractor, but we don't want to double count the $1,000. The $1,000 is what the agreement was for. So the system automatically knows to put this as a $0 hours for the contractor. So for those of you that are using the contractor portal, this is how they would then be able to access their work in the contractor portal. And it's a little bit different with agreements. With agreements in the contractor portal, they're not going to be submitting estimated or actual costs because it's already specified by the agreement. So that's one quick detail to specify. Okay. So, and also let me quickly pull up this contractor record, because this, for those of you that may have missed the announcement about this earlier this year, as of the spring release, vendor and contractor records are now one and the same in NextGen. So when I did that process, when I said I wanted the Environmental Tree Services to be added as a contractor on the work order, it automatically turns this flag on the vendor/contractor record. So the way that these flags work is when you're creating a vendor or a contractor, you have the ability to make it the other one. So if I have a vendor, I can make that vendor a contractor or vice versa. So I just kind of wanted to specify that once you say yes to that pop-up, the system does automatically check the contractor flag for that vendor. Okay, so quick summary of what we just saw. If you're looking for a really simple workflow, no controlled inventory, no approvals needed, that's the one that I just showed. So basically, and like I said earlier, I'm saying maintenance worker, but for you, it's going to be whoever is responsible for associating the agreements with the work orders. That person's just going to click on the add agreement button on the agreement zone, select the agreement, fill out the estimated units. And as I'm looking at this, I realize I need to go back and do one step. Add the vendor as the contractor. And then the last step is going to be to actually add the actual units. So for those of you that have been attending these sessions, the estimated units is how many hours you think are going to be spent, or for an agreement's sake, how many units of that line item you think you're going to use. And then you would come back and actually update the actual quantity there. So that's the full workflow for that one with none of those settings turned on. Any questions on that one before I go and turn on controlled inventory? Okay, I'm not seeing any at the moment. So I'll go ahead and keep moving through. But if anything comes up, you guys know you can always type your question in. Okay, so the next one, like I said, if you guys have been on our webinars before, you were very familiar with controlled inventory. We've been talking about it for the past 2 webinars in this series. So to turn that on, I'm going to go to settings and then setup, company options, and inventory. And here's where you're going to see the agreement controlled inventory. So you just toggle that on and click save. So I'm going to go repeat that same workflow, but this time you're going to see what it looks like when we have controlled inventory turned on. So I'm just going to set up my work order. Actually want to use the same one. Okay, so this time, now that I have controlled inventory turned on, when I go to click add on the agreement zone, it's actually going to take me to a requisition. So similar to stock and non-stock, if you put controlled inventory on, now you're involving like the warehouse or whoever's playing that role for your organization. The person's not just going to be able to add the agreement and put in the actual units. There's going to have to be a process where that agreement, the items or services are issued by, I'm assuming the warehouse team, but could be someone else for you guys. So you have this basic screen where some of the information pulls over from the work order. You do have the ability to put user-defined fields on the requisition. So if you had more information that you want to get from the user who is putting this agreement onto the work order, that's your zone to do that. And then down here in the requisition details, that's where you're going to add your agreement. So this screen looks the exact same as before, where you come in and you're going to pick your agreement, pick your line item if it's a blanket agreement, and then click attach, confirm your quantity. I'm going to leave it at 1, and then click attach here. And then you're going to click save. Same question. So this is still the person who is adding this to the work order decides, do you want to add this as a contractor? So if that vendor that you have an agreement with needs to perform work, you want to say yes. If they don't need to perform work and it's just for items, you can say no. And this is where I'm going to kind of wear a different hat. So I was acting as like the maintenance worker who's adding the agreement to the work order. Now I'm going to play the role of the warehouse manager. So what just happened when I added the agreement this time is it created an item requisition. So I can hover over this paper bag icon and see that requisition. Click the hyperlinked number, and it will not let me actually issue on this requisition until I create a PO and receive that item. So it's assumed basically that even if this is an item or a service, that you need to go through a PO and receiving process. So the warehouse manager would come and they would create the PO. And I know we've seen this process for the past couple, so I'm not necessarily talking about all of the details on this screen. I'm just going to save it so we can move to the next step. So I've created a PO for that agreement that has the service on it. And then essentially the warehouse manager needs to receive. So that's what's actually going to pull. This is more intuitive, I think, if it's an item. You still do need to go through the same process if it's a service, but you're going to receive the quantity and click receive. That did a couple things. It updated the final amount of the PO and it changed the requisition status to complete. So then what I'm going to see is if I go back to my requisition, I will have the ability to actually issue. Oh, sorry, my mistake. It actually issued for me in this case. So that's one difference between the item workflow that we went through. And then once you receive the item, it's going to fill in the actual units here. So again, if you're looking for something for a workflow that has a little bit more control, where your warehouse team or your admin team or whoever's doing that is going to have a little bit more oversight, you're probably going to want to go through this workflow where the agreement's added to the work order and then it goes through the requisition and PO process. So let me pull over our summary sheet here. Presenter view. So when we have controlled inventory on, the blue steps are all the same. So I'm just going to kind of skim over those. Basically, the user adds the requisition. The only difference is they have to fill out, if you have user defined fields on the requisition that they need to fill out, they can fill that out. But then they're basically selecting the agreement on that requisition. And then it's going to go to the warehouse manager, who I'm calling the warehouse manager, who needs to create the PO and then receive the agreement items. And then from there, that's how the actual units update. So let me pause there to take any questions if there are any. And then if not, I'm going to show how to do, I've only shown you blanket agreements, so I want to show you how to add a contract agreement as well. So another helpful thing to point out at this point is you actually cannot add more than one agreement to a work order. It's a one-to-one thing. So if I've already added an agreement here, that's the only agreement I can do for that work order. And so just to show you guys one example of just a contract agreement, let me set up a new work order so that I can be able to add that. It's very similar, except when you're actually adding the agreement, you obviously wouldn't be selecting an item. The only thing that you can do here is put in a quick description of what you're using that money for. And then you are going to put the type, and then you have to put in the cost. So again, this is a major difference because with the line items on the blanket agreement, it comes with a set cost. This one, it's assumed that you're putting in the cost that's needed for that particular instance that you're using the agreement. And then save. So same process, or similar process, I should say, whether it's agreement or a contract agreement or a blanket agreement, it's still going to go through the exact same workflow, whether you have controlled inventory turned on or not. One thing I want to do, I know going through these workflows, I can tell it gets a little overwhelming. So I'm not going to go through the third one in the software because, like I said, if you've been in the last couple sessions, you would have seen that how the approval process works. So in this case, I'm not going to actually show that in the software because it's a lot of flipping around and logging in as different people. But if you decide to have the approval by hierarchy turned on, the only difference that you're going to have is the requisition has to be approved before the warehouse manager would create a PO. So if you guys need supervisor approval when people are using these agreements on work orders, you'd want to have that setting on. And you would want to revisit our stock item workflow webinar where we talked about the details of how the approvals work, making sure that you have supervisors set up and max requisition set up. But I wanted to throw this workflow on here just so that you guys have it as a resource if you download the deck to reference after the fact. But otherwise, it's going to be the exact same process. And so with that, I know this is a lot of new information, so you guys might not have questions just yet, but are there any questions from people today, or thoughts or comments? Any notes of things I missed, Gabby?
I think that was pretty good. I'm trying to think of anything else we can add.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this in whatever direction you guys have, or you guys want, depending on your questions. We always leave this time um, just open. So give people a couple minutes before we wrap up in case anything comes to mind. And I don't see anything. We have agreements for services and items. I would also love to, and it doesn't have to be today, but if you guys are, I would love to hear more about how you guys might be using agreements, or might think you want to use them. Just to kind of, while we have some downtime here to talk about, this is something that our team is happy to help you with. If you think you want to talk about how you can start using a module, we can set up a call and kind of do a brainstorming of how it could be useful, how the workflow is going to work for you. That's definitely something we want to help you guys with. We know it can be a little overwhelming when we just throw out new features and you kind of want to learn more about best practices. So I do see a question. If you want to add a particular asset to the work order, that will be done by creating the work, when creating the work order. And yes, that's correct. So I skipped over that today, just because I wanted to make sure I was sticking on topic. But when you're creating the work order, to add an asset, you would just click the add button on the asset zone. And you can then either navigate by location or class. Or if you're using GIS assets, you can add them from the map. And that's how that would look there. Any other questions before we close out? Okay. So while people might be thinking of some final comments or questions, I do just want to go back to the schedule. Time has flown by. We originally had 6 webinars in this series, and we only have 2 left. So on the 28th, we're going to be talking about reorder, purchase order, and receiving. So just to kind of show how that fits in the picture, we spent the last 3 webinars going over workflows for stock, non-stock, and agreements. This webinar on the 28th is really important to attend if you are using NextGen for stock items. This is the workflow of how you would reorder, create purchase orders, and receive items. So I would say if you are using stock items in NextGen, you don't already know the details of these modules, this is a must attend, because it's kind of essential for you guys to know how that process works. It's not as relevant for non-stock, and I say that because even today I showed you the very basic piece of receiving that was needed for to make the workflow work with agreements, and Sukhdeep did the same thing in the non-stock webinar. So if you attended just those, you know how to do the whole process, the PO and the receiving part. This one, we definitely need to cover for replenishing stock items. And then on the 18th, we're going to be covering cycle counts and warehouse reports. So that's a good one to attend as well if you are responsible for managing the inventory in the warehouse. And otherwise, I think I'm not seeing any other questions come in. We kind of had a feeling with this being a newer module that it might take you guys a bit to dive in and come up with those questions. So we can go ahead and close out early, but I do just want to always say if you guys end up looking into this, you have questions, you need help, we are happy to help you. Just send an email to support@nextgenam.com, or you can call us at this number and extension 2. And we would be happy to set something up. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined. When you close out, you're going to see a quick survey. I know sometimes that feels like something to just ignore. I'm not going to lie. I have a tendency to ignore some surveys in my life as well, like the ones from when I purchase things online or go to the grocery store. But this survey you guys should definitely take, because I look at that, I make decisions of how we're going to present content. This can be about the content itself, what you want to see more of, or how the information's presented. We don't want to bore you guys, so it's nice to have your feedback if possible. So if you wouldn't mind taking some time to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. Otherwise, you guys can expect an email invitation for that next webinar on Monday, or Tuesday, I should say. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close out. So thank you to Gabby for helping with the questions, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.